I call to order the June 10th regular business meeting of Waynesboro City Council, and I'd like to ask Mr. Allen if he would please lead us in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. I'd like to welcome everyone this evening. For those in attendance, if you wish to speak during a citizen comment period or a public hearing, please sign up on the sheet in back of chambers. Item 2 is adoption of the meeting agenda. Is there a motion to amend the agenda to allow for a closed session?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Short. And is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Any discussion? All in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And that passes. Agenda is approved, 5-0. Item 3 is matters from mayor. As part of City Council's annual business appreciation recognition, I recently had the opportunity to visit New Country Organics. New Country Organics is a producer, wholesaler, and retailer of organic poultry, livestock feeds, and other related products. Mr. Jim Campbell and his staff gave us an extensive tour of their impressive operation and how they are transforming a 100-year-old former apple cider vinegar processing plant into this facility that produces animal feed to customers around the world. I am continually amazed by the diversity of products made in Waynesboro and the hardworking, dedicated companies and their employees that make products that are used globally. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Hitchen and his staff for facilitating the business appreciation visits for council members in the respective wards. Item 4 is matters from council members. Does anybody have anything?
I
Really?
just want to thank again staff and Dwayne Jones in particular for the opening of Sunset Park. I wish we had had the foresight to maybe put some tube counters out there for the number of people that have been up there, but I have enjoyed stalking Facebook by putting in search and just Sunset Park, Waynesboro to see the countless thousands of people that have posted photographs up there. It's so cool, and just a hats off to staff and all involved. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Item 5 is consideration of the consent agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the consent agenda is adopted. Item 6 is to receive a presentation regarding the city's bridge maintenance program and the condition of facilities. Mr. McRae, the Director of Public Works, will address council.
Right. Make sure this is on. All right. Madam Mayor and members of council, thank you all for the opportunity to talk with you tonight about the city's bridge program and give you hopefully a brief update. Some of the topics I wanted to hit on tonight were just an overview of bridges in the city, review of some transportation funding mechanisms. Bridges are an integral part of our transportation network. The requirements the city has for bridges within our transportation network, some recent repair and replacement projects, and a little more in-depth review of the Hopeman Parkway over CSX Railroad bridge status, and then a little bit about upcoming bridge program activities. So there are 20 bridges within the city listed on the National Bridge Inventory. As you can see, most of those are clustered on the eastern part of the city over railroads or the South River. Of those 20 bridges in 2024, 9 were listed as being in good condition, 7 in fair condition, 1 in satisfactory condition, and 3 were in poor condition. One of those being the Hopeman Parkway Bridge, the yellow dot here, that we'll talk about a little bit more in depth. Another structure we're going to talk a little bit more about this evening is the Wayne Avenue Bridge over the South River, the red dot there in the bottom of the map. So just as a refresher from when we talked last year about pavement funding, the city's transportation network maintenance is funded primarily from the Commonwealth. We receive approximately $4.5 million a year annually from the state, and that is to cover everything within our road network. So traffic lights, the electricity for traffic lights, sidewalks, crosswalks, our paving program, as well as bridge maintenance. So that's $4.5 million, but it gets spread across a pretty wide, pretty large network. As far as the city's requirements for bridges, first and foremost, we're required to have regular inspections of those bridges performed and provide some fairly intensive reports to the to VDOT. We use a consultant who specializes in that process to perform the inspections. The inspections really focus on the three main parts of the structure. So the deck or the driving surface, the superstructure, which is typically either steel or concrete beams, and then the substructure. So those inspections focus on giving a rating for each of those components of the bridge. Once the engineers perform the inspection, actually given it a condition, they use that information along with the actual technical details on the bridge construction to develop load ratings, and then we have to post bridges to warn or prohibit certain types of vehicles if the structure deteriorates to a certain point. And so those are our bigger requirements from the state for maintaining bridges. We also perform limited maintenance in-house, removing vegetation, repaving, bridge approaches, making sure signage is compliant with current standards, things of that nature. So I was going to spend a few minutes just talking with you all about some of the recent projects within the city, and I'll run through these chronologically. So in 2013, the Broad Street Bridge superstructure and deck were replaced. That was $2.2 million in 2013 money. But so here's a couple pictures then of the project, and 50% of that came from the city. In 2017, the Main Street Bridge was replaced in full. So that was that $7 million was fully VDOT administered, and it also included relocating McElroy over to what's now Race Avenue. The Florence Avenue Bridge was completed in 2020. That was a deck and superstructure replacement project that was approximately $2 million. The city had about $200,000 in that. The rest was state and federal funds. It reopened in 2020. If you all will recall, it actually was closed for about 2 years prior to that. Another project that was recently completed in 2022 is the A Street culvert. This project is, because it's on a collector road and a named stream, it is part of our national bridge inventory, even though this was a city stormwater project that was driven to reduce the duration of flooding on A Street, so we had emergency access for the neighborhood there on A Street. That was a $915,000 project that was about $475,000 in city funds. Another bridge that we recently completed some repairs to in 2021 was the Bookerdale Bridge. This isn't in the National Bridge Inventory, but it's heavily used because it's on a cut through from West Main to Lou DeWitt. So City Forces in-house replaced the deck, the steel beams, and then repaved it at a cost of $40,000 in materials. Another structure that's received some attention recently is the 4th Street Bridge. This is one of the bridges in the bridge inventory that's rated a poor condition. It's a really neat structure, but it's also very old. It was built in 1910. It's actually on the National Historic Register. The last major repairs were in 2008 to the bridge deck itself. Those timbers are in really bad shape. An estimate in 2016 dollars to replace it was $8 million. So based on the prohibitive cost to replace it and recommendations from our engineers as a way to extend the lifespan of the structure, we closed it to vehicular traffic in 2023. So it's open to pedestrians and bicycles. We secured a Transportation Alternatives Program grant last year that will become active in fiscal year '25 for about $200,000 to do some more permanent upgrades to that facility. So both safety upgrades and then also making a wider path for pedestrians and bicycles. The city did commit $40,000, so that's a 4-to-1 funding to match there. And very preliminary guesstimate really would be construction in 2026. I wanted to talk a little bit more in depth about the Hopeman Parkway Bridge over CSX Railroad and first run you all through the timeline of where we stand with that structure. So in February of 2020, the structure was rated as being poor due to deterioration of the steel beams or the superstructure. Once that happened and we had turned in our inspection reports to VDOT, it was incorporated into the National Bridge Inventory and then put on a state of good repair list, which makes the bridge eligible for significant federal funds for rehabilitation or replacement. That's a very extensive program. There's heavy vetting of projects. So it required a pre-application where we had to go through and do an extensive deck evaluation to determine the condition of the concrete, also a cost-benefit analysis to determine if it was more cost-effective to rehabilitate it or to replace it. The pre-application was approved. We put in a full application in the spring of 2023, and then we're notified in July of 23 we had been selected for a $7.6 million in funding to replace the bridge. Following that, the city staff, VDOT staff, were looking through some of the inspection reports, just mapping out the project in a little more detail. And based on recommendations from VDOT, they felt like the poor condition warranted some emergency mitigation work, and as well looking at the load rating more closely. Some of that too is the load rating, like a lot of other things, as it's gotten more refined, it's become a little bit more stringent. So we mobilized fairly quickly with the help of VDOT, and in February of 2024 completed some emergency bracing on the structure and then reduced the load rating. So here are some pictures of the bridge itself. So these are the beams. You can see where the beams have deteriorated. This is where they were braced up by a contractor, and then just deterioration of the concrete itself. So those repairs were performed at a cost of approximately $110,000. We do have to inspect the structure every 6 months just to monitor its condition. And then the load rating was reduced to now 17 tons for dual axle vehicles, which means it's no longer safe for emergency vehicles to use the structure, as well as other larger vehicles. So very rough timeline. We should execute a grant agreement hopefully in the fall of 2024. The funding actually won't become available until FY26, so we would start design fall of 25. It's going to take about a year for design. We have to coordinate with CSX Railroad, meet federal environmental standards. We'll have to meet federal labor standards, plus just redesign a bridge. So about a year for design and then about a year for construction. So we're looking at about 4 years out from having the structure fully replaced. One other structure I wanted to bring your attention to briefly is the Wayne Avenue Bridge over the South River. Right now, the overall condition is fair. However, the superstructure condition is a 4. If it were to drop to a 3, then we would be in a very similar situation to what we are with the Hopeman Parkway Bridge and have to look very closely at the load rating for the structure. Our engineers' recommendations right now are to begin identifying funding for significant steel repairs, and then also to monitor for that load rating. The estimates for repair on this project or on this structure are very wide, anywhere from $1.4 million to fairly minimal steel bracing and repairs to $14 million for a full replacement. As far as some of our next steps, some of the things we're looking at very closely is is developing a bridge preservation program. We've identified about $500,000 in surplus VDOT funding that we can use as a pilot program for this. That would really be a recurring program we would want to do every 1 to 3 years. Sometimes there's just an economy of scale of if you stack a couple of years worth of work together, there's a lot more to do. You get more favorable pricing. But bridge preservation is really about kind of like pavement maintenance that we've talked about previously. So it's about sealing cracks in bridges to keep salt and water from getting to the concrete and the steel. And it's often we're going to be driven towards keeping our bridges that are in good and fair condition up to snuff. So, for instance, we'll probably be working on the Main Street Bridge or the Broad Street Bridge or the North Oak Lane Bridge that's on the Southern Corridor route, more so than we might be working on some that are in worse condition. And then finally, under the direction of Mr. Hamp, I've got staff enrolled in a boot camp learning about how to apply for bridge repair and maintenance funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law. That's another 80-20 grant, so we would need to put up 20% of the funding for a successful application. That grant application is due the end of October, so we're working actively with VDOT staff to confirm whether they would be able to assist with administering some of the funds, and as well what types of funding, specifically the urban maintenance funds, might be eligible to use as match. So it's very likely that in another 6 to 8 weeks we would be presenting you with a more detailed package as far as what we were looking for to go after funding for bridge preservation activities on some of these structures. So if you all have any questions, feel free to ask. First, I would like to just point out most of the pictures in the presentation came from our engineers at Schwartz and Associates. And then also thank Jim Powers and Chris Garrison in my office who provided the maps and a lot of the statistics on the bridges themselves.
Thank you. Any questions?
I'm just curious on the 4th Street Bridge, because of its historical significance, is it going to be replaced the same way as it can be paved?
So what we would do, I think the intent was to do some sort of a much narrower pathway in the center of the bridge, but it would most likely be timber.
Just curious.
Trevor, just a couple, thank you so much for the presentation. Just a couple of follow-up questions. For the Hopeman Parkway Bridge I mentioned to you a second ago, but just for the benefit of the group, is so the SGR Bridge program is a replace in kind program, and given the abundance of housing that has come online in recent memory, and looking ahead, and the location of the middle school and shopping and alike, I think it's fair to reason that non-motorized accommodations need to sort of be designed and incorporated into the structure, and that would not be eligible under the SGR program. And so there's a local cost to that. So I just want to sort of say that out loud, and I know you all are looking at it. I tried to pull up the application online. It wasn't working. But just to say that. And then I think the other thing that I was interested in is relative to the fare structure. So I think it was on the third slide. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fare, 1 poor. I think that 2 poor.
7 are in fair condition, 1 satisfactory condition. The 3 structures that are in poor condition, the Baird Avenue Bridge that's immediately upstream of the DuPont Avenue Bridge, so it's one it's not used very regularly, or
Right.
doesn't see a whole lot of traffic.
I'd be curious relative to fare, and I know, with sometimes minimal improvement, a fare can go to a good in a blink. But I would be curious, I think, for the benefit of my colleagues and the community to understand order of magnitude cost, replacement cost, or significant substructure or superstructure replacement, rehabilitation, what those order of magnitude costs might be for the poor and fair condition structures. So again, leaning ahead to the conversation of you get to a 20% match on an $8 million bridge, and then you compound that over 7 or 8 structures that were all kind of relatively put in a decade or two of one another. You can see the compounding costs could all kind of hit you at the same time. And so if the community wanted to, and this council or future councils wanted to consider a capital improvement plan targeted towards infrastructure, that might help inform the conversation a little bit to have, again, that order of magnitude contribution, likely city contribution costs, obviously maximizing grants to the extent possible, but.
Yeah, I'd probably need to work with the finance director and give you guys any kind of firm costs. What I can say is that we've heard consistently from VDOT staff, at least verbally, that the bridge preservation is considered to be much more cost effective. So
Right.
even really to keep us in the running for future larger replacement projects, some evidence that we, the city, have invested some funding towards just the basic maintenance and preservation activities. It's important because, and it's a much more cost-effective way to keep the bridges.
Develops a game plan, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Great, that's all I had,
Okay.
Madam Mayor.
Anybody else? Thank you so much for your presentation. No action is required of council this evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Item 7 is to receive information on the city's general fund debt and provide guidance on the anticipated refinancing of existing debt. I'd like to call on Mr. McCormick.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and good evening, members of council. In 2014, the council refinanced general obligation debt, and the amortization schedule included a final payment of approximately $8 million that would be due in 2024. At the time, it was recognized that the debt would likely need to be refinanced again during the final year of repayment. The city's financial advisors have reviewed the debt and provided 2 potential options for the refinance. So, based on a couple of the questions that we received during the briefing conversations and things like that, I'm going to put a little bit more context with option A and option B. So the original debt was issued in 2005 and amortized into 2037, and the rate was 4.28 or 4.3%. So option A would basically reset back to that original amortization schedule. It's estimated that the finance on the amortizations, or the bid on the new debt would come in at about 4.06%. So even the new debt would be less interest than the original 2004 issuance, a little bit more than the current rate of the 3.2%. So as we talked through the CIP plan during the manager's recommended budget, one of the questions that came up was what would happen if we financed that out for a little bit longer. So when we talked with bond counsel about it, the most you can go out is the useful life, the original estimated useful life of the debt, useful life of the underlying asset, which is Cape Cons Middle School. So that would be 40 years total, which could push you out for refinance for debt service for an additional 21 years instead of 13 years. So that would reduce the average annual debt service by an estimated $181,000. So option A keeps the debt service basically at where it is budgeted currently and what we're paying currently for the debt, puts you back onto the original amortization schedule. Option B reduces the debt service from year to year, but stretches it out over a longer period. So it's similar to when you finance a home. If you finance a home over 15 years, you pay more month to month, more year to year, but then at the end you pay less in interest total because you pay it for less amount of time. So what staff would be looking for this evening is guidance on would council be interested in financing the debt over a shorter period of time and keeping the debt service basically neutral, or would council be interested in refinancing the debt for a little bit longer and perhaps freeing up a little bit of capacity to go towards a future project like Nature's Crossing or the high school project? Also, for council's awareness, once this conversation's through the night and you all give us guidance on this, you will see a resolution at your next meeting to actually put the request for proposal out to refinance the debt. That'll be the last item the council, or the last action the council needs to take on this item. In the meantime, we'll also be doing the first credit rating that we've had in a few years, because we're going to do a public issuance on this through a request for proposal instead of going through the pool program where we've piggyback on the states. So council will also get a briefing on the results of the credit presentation.
Okay. Are there any questions for Mr. McCormick? Is there any preference or consensus on any preference of council on which option you prefer, or is this something we need to decide tonight?
Because it is going out for a request for proposal, we do need a decision tonight.
Okay.
I think, again, absent a push one way or the other, the easiest thing, or the most logical thing to do would be to set it back to the original amortization schedule. If it was council's desire to free up some debt service, we could certainly go with and do option B, absent advice. Otherwise, we would probably just continue back or defer back to the old amortization schedule in option A, which would be the shorter schedule, a little bit lower interest rate, and pay less in interest.
But I think my preference, I'll just jump in, Madam Mayor, would be to go with option A, to transcend the balance of it to pay off the debt.
I agree with
I
option
agree.
A.
And we wouldn't need to vote on this. This is just
No, ma'am.
direction. Okay. So option A.
Ma'am. We'll bring you a
Okay.
resolution at the
Thank
next
you.
meeting that effectuates
All
that.
right, sound, very good. Mr. Allen, did you want to, are you agree? Option A, okay.
I looked at him first.
Oh, you did? Option A it is.
You already told me what to do.
Thank you so much. Okay. So that moves us to item 8, and that's to consider adopting the 2025 capital improvement plan. Mr. McCormick.
Thank you again, Madam Mayor. So in front of you this evening, it's the original city manager's recommended capital improvement plan was presented to council during a work session on April 10th, 2024. It identifies funding plans for fiscal years for capital projects for 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028, and also includes unplanned, unfunded projects that have been identified but haven't had a funding source identified that go beyond the 2028 year. The only two modifications made was an adjustment to show the balance for the animal shelter in 2026 and to also update the estimate for the high school project for 2027. I think it was originally shown at about 40 million and updated to the high-end estimate that the school had given us at the joint work session of 56 million. The most important action item on this evening is that a motion to approve or endorse it is simply that. It's a plan, it's a roadmap for future councils, for staff to look to. Actually getting the money spent comes in the next item, and that's just for the 2025 portion of the plan, and that's a budget appropriation in the next item. So we're asking you to endorse the plan this evening and then endorse the plan this evening in this item and then appropriate the funds in the next item.
Okay. All right. Are there any questions for Mr. McCormick? No questions. Is there a motion to adopt the fiscal year 2025 CIP?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Do I have a second?
No second.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that, we've adopted the fiscal year 2025 CIP. We'll move on to item 9, and that is to hold a public hearing and consider introducing an ordinance amending the fiscal year 2024 budget in the amount of $8,923,211. I'm going to call on Mr. McCormick.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So the main items in this are the capital improvement fund for 2025. It's part of the 2024 budget amendment because it'll be done during the fiscal year, wrap up of fiscal year 2024. That's $5.4 million, $5.37 million of the $8 million. There's also some interfund transfers from fund balance for the schools to wrap up a few projects that they were finishing up. I think the projects have been completed. This is just to bring the budget into alignment. And also some funding for the school nutrition fund, where they were spending down some of their fund balance. They have a fund that's specifically for school nutrition that's funded significantly by the state, that they can only have so much fund balance. And some specificity on the projects for the schools. It was Winona Elementary and Wayne Hills, pre-K, reno, windows and handicap walkways, and then do new dish machines at 4 schools, and a new combination oven for the school nutrition fund piece.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Are there any questions? I hereby open the public hearing. Do we have anyone signed up to speak?
No, ma'am.
Okay. I hereby close the public hearing. Is there a motion to introduce the ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Any discussion? This ordinance will receive final consideration at the June 24th meeting. Item 10 is to hold a public hearing and consider adopting an ordinance granting a conditional permit allowing townhouses in the HB Highway Business District at 0 King Avenue, tax map 26-1-E. Ms. Tate?
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of City Council. If you'll remember at your last meeting, we introduced this conditional use permit request. So I'm going to cover it briefly again this evening prior to opening the public hearing. So as you're aware, conditional use permits allow for a case-by-case review of uses, which may be but are not always compatible with neighboring uses. So in order to approve a conditional use permit, the proposed use must be consistent with good zoning practice and not create kind of adverse or detrimental effects economically or otherwise to adjacent property. So essentially, it should kind of mirror what might be allowed by right in the area and not create any additional adverse impacts, but often needs a little bit more of a critical look to make sure that it fits in. So the location is at 0 King Avenue. It's directly across from William Perry Elementary School. It sits behind the Food Lion off of Hopeman, and then there's some additional undeveloped property that's also adjacent. So the nature of the request is a conditional use permit for townhouses, and the reason it requires a conditional use permit request is because in highway business, mainly business uses are what's permitted by right. The property is a little under 9.5 acres, and the submitted concept plan provided by the applicant shows 79 townhouses on that property. So just a little bit more context, you can see the adjacent uses. You have Food Line and the self-storage. You have some vacant areas. You have some multifamily, the school, and then kind of other residential development that is in the nearby vicinity. This shows the concept plan that lays out the 79 townhouses that the applicant has demonstrated can kind of be met on the property with parking requirements, although these are the older parking requirements for townhouses. So the applicant could likely get some additional units than the 79 if they took advantage of those recent parking requirements that allow your driveway to count, but then also have a certain percentage of guest parking. A little bit more zoomed in, and you can see those areas where there are some kind of guest or kind of communal parking for the development. So the comprehensive plan, the area that you see in red, it is designated this parcel and this an adjacent vacant parcel and the existing business. It is planned for commercial retail. So the plan encourages also to have compact residential development close to areas of intense activity. So while it doesn't outright match the land use map that does reserve this property for business use, there is a desire within the comprehensive plan to have a mixture of uses within an area. The property does not front on Hopeman Parkway, and there is transit and shopping nearby, which could help be different things that the residences could utilize. The zoning is highway business, and you can see that there's some adjacent multifamily zoning, and that's the colors that you see in brown, and then an adjacent parcel that does front on Hopeman Parkway that is business zoning along with this property. Townhouses are permitted, but only by a conditional use permit. The property used for townhouses or multifamily, if to even apply for a conditional use permit must be at least 20,000 square feet. And this property is a little less than 9.5 acres, so it meets that requirement. So the applicant, under their current concept plan, is proposing 79 townhouses. So that's a density of about 8.34 units per acre. So to compare that to our residential zoning districts, RG5 permits 8 units an acre, and our residential multifamily for townhouses specifically permits 10 units an acre. So staff notes that the density may change based on that new townhouse parking requirements. So staff would recommend that the development be built to the RMF standards, so they could have no more than 10 units per acre, and that the development be built in general conformance with the concept plan. And again, the concept plan is shown here. So to kind of analyze the potential impacts to adjacent properties, the property is surrounded by a mix of commercial and residential development of various densities. The residential in the area is a mix of townhouses and single-family detached. And then much of the property is in the vicinity of areas that are zoned but not developed as multifamily. So staff feels that the proposed development is consistent with the surrounding zoning. How the property would be accessed: it would be accessed by one boulevard-style entrance that's directly across from the entrance to William Perry Elementary. And staff does recommend a condition that this style entrance be provided. If I go back to the concept map, you will see that there are adjacent connections to undeveloped property. And so when that property is developed, the expectation would be that there would be connections there. But until that is to happen, there would be kind of only one way in and out. So the boulevard entrance kind of helps create that ability for emergency vehicles to get in and out if one side of the entrance was to be blocked. The applicant did complete a turn lane warrant analysis for this specific development, and no turn lane improvements were warranted on King Avenue. These just show those secondary or adjacent connections to undeveloped property. That property also has frontage on King, so depending, they might also have an entrance, but you know, our ordinance requires interconnectivity solely for the purpose of dispersing property in multiple directions. Dispersing traffic, not property. And this is just a picture somewhere else, I think in the county, that shows what that boulevard style entrance would look like. So staff notes that there is existing sidewalk network, that public water and sewer is available to serve the property, but certainly available fire flow and water and sewer specific requirements would be determined at the public improvement plan stage if the conditional use permit were granted. The schools, it's in the William Perry Elementary School District, so likely could be an increase in students for William Perry and then middle and high schools. But as school staff has noted before, there aren't any concerns with school enrollment capacities. So if the CUP is approved by council, then the applicant would follow up with a preliminary plat for review and approval by the Planning Commission. But if approved and meeting any of the conditions that council sets on the property, then that would be more of a by right review, and staff would review to ensure that it's compliant with the zoning ordinance, which would be any conditions set as part of this conditional use permit process and our subdivision ordinance. And then once staff review is complete, a public hearing would be scheduled with the Planning Commission, who would approve the plan. And then after that, a public improvement plan would be submitted to Public Works for review and approval to cover all the public elements of the development. So townhouses are permitted in the Highway Business District, but only by conditional use permit. The proposed development is located in an area with transit access and an existing sidewalk network, and staff feels that it would be consistent with the zoning of the surrounding area. The necessary utilities are present, and there aren't capacity concerns related to the schools. The Planning Commission does recommend approval of the conditional use permit with the following conditions: that the development be developed in general conformance with the concept layout that was attached as part of the application, that the development be built according to the RMF standards, so that would create a maximum 10 units per acre. And then lastly, that a boulevard-style entrance be provided for the primary access to the development. So that's all I have, unless you have any questions before opening the public hearing.
Any questions, council? Okay. I hereby open the public hearing. Thank you, Leslie.
And the applicant is here to speak.
I hereby open the public hearing.
Okay. Other than the applicant, no one has signed up to
Okay.
speak.
I invite the applicant forward.
Ms. Mayor, members of City Council, my name is Lee Garrison from Fredericksburg, Virginia. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. Mr. Short, we came in early today, and we did take the opportunity to go up to Sunset Park. We will have tripped your trip meter, and
Okay, good.
everybody in this room, whoever had anything to do with that park, should be commended and be proud. The views up there, the facilities. My daughter went into the restroom, and it's like, Dad, there's like penny tile floor. She's redoing her bathroom. And I'm sitting there going, man, this is a picnic shelter. I thought it would be a concrete floor. So what y'all did there, well done. With me tonight, I have Mr. Bill Moore from Balzer and Associates, local engineer. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. I also have Gene Brown. Gene is one of the owners of Atlantic Builders, building partner on the project. They started building here in Waynesboro several years ago in the surrounding county. And I just want to take a minute to let you know kind of some things about Atlantic Builders. They probably 2 or 3 weeks ago had the opportunity to, you have a good tour guide and a good economic development director in Bill Hasroth. Bill took them around, and they have now committed to help Bill and donate to the Wayne Theater, to the YMCA. They like to be involved in the community. They're not a national builder. They're in Fredericksburg. They build houses where I think this year they're going to have almost $500,000 worth of profits that they donate to local charities in Fredericksburg. I'm not sitting here telling you trying to buy a vote in Waynesboro, but just letting you know what they do for the community. They want to be an active participant and a partner. They understand what it means to be a partner in the community. Me, myself, I'm just a one-man show. I don't have a staff, small developer. Former life, used to be in buildings and rooms like this. I was a town engineer for Ashland, worked for VDOT, so I can appreciate the job that you guys do, job that you all do, and my hat's off to you. I mean, it's sometimes a thankless job. So that being said, I found the property. I actually came over here to a meeting with Mr. Wood and some other folks, and just rode around and saw the property and got excited, and called the realtor. It's on the market, and he said, yeah, it's been on the market for over 10 years. What do you think? And I said, well, I was thinking residential. And he said, well, it's owned commercial. And I was a little surprised. When I look at the land use around, I see residential across from elementary. I'm like, man, this is perfect for residential. But it's not zoned for residential. It's zoned commercial. I understand that. So I set up a meeting with staff, and we came and talked. And I was surprised to learn that you could do residential with a conditional use permit, certain types of residential, instead of rezoning. So that told me that I guess there was a chance that it's a compatible use. It's not a rezoning. You just have to make sure you're not doing any damage. So I said, okay, let's try this. And met with staff, prepared our plan, met with planning commission, got a favorable vote from the planning commission. So feel good about the project. From a land use perspective, I know it's zoned commercial sort of in conjunction with the Food Lion, but it's not really connected. You have the big change in topo, you have the tree line there, so I don't feel it's part of the Food Lion shopping center, so to speak. To me, it still feels more residential. But that being said, it's zoned commercial. I talked to the realtor and did some research, and there's 6 pad sites in front of the Food Lion. 6 pad sites, and I think about 6 acres of commercial zone land that's vacant to the west of the mini storage. That when I looked at the GIS today, it looked like the Food Lion and mini storage. I don't know it was built, but it showed up on the 2002 aerial plan. So I guess for over 20 years, those pad sites have been available and haven't been taken. So I don't know when this property will be developed for commercial use. And so I would ask for your consideration, and hopefully you see fit to grant the conditional use permit. If not, I would ask for it to be deferred and maybe have further communications about it some of the arguments I would make would be, usually in Fredericksburg, the two things against residential are schools and transportation, and I'm like, wow, schools say they have capacity and don't seem to be traffic issues. But I do understand there's a lot of residential going on now. On this specific site, I would say that if it's zoned HB, some of the uses that could go there, if it wasn't residential, would be social service institutions for drugs and alcohol, brew pubs, bars, nightclubs, alcohol and liquor sales, tattoo parlors, self-storage, used car sales, vape shop. And I personally think that a residential development would be better than, not saying those uses would go there, but they could. So this would be an opportunity to put a good use on the site. I think that covers all. I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but covers most of the stuff I wanted to cover, and welcome any questions, concerns, and like I said, I would appreciate your consideration. If not, I'd love a chance to talk to you.
Thank you for your time. We do have a
Okay.
4-minute limit.
All right, thank you.
And you wrapped it up just in the nick of time.
All right, thank you.
Does any council members have questions for the applicant?
Well, I guess one thing, Mr. Garrison, is that if I heard you right, and let me know if I didn't. So, are you interested in tabling it this evening and spending some more time with it, or because I mean the options are tabling to a specific date, to tabling indefinitely? What would be what would be your pleasure?
You know, my
I
preference
don't
would,
wanna-
my preference would be a favorable vote, but if that is not the case, I have heard that there are concerns about the project. And I found that out this past week. You know, through the whole process, I've felt favorable and positive about the project. And what I would ask, if there are questions or concerns, the opportunity to address them. You know, if it were to be denied tonight, I would feel, wow, the first time I ever heard anything negative about the project was a couple days before the project or at the meeting. So I would appreciate the opportunity to have conversations. And you might say, hey, you can do X, Y, and Z, and I say, I can't do that, but at least have the opportunity to have discussions about what could help the project.
Okay, so would you like a time, if we table tonight, would you like a time frame or indefinite? I
I'm-
need a request.
Basically, you could bring it back at a time suitable
Yeah.
to you. Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to be at the beach in 2 weeks. I would be, other than that, I'm going to be ready and available at any time. It's more, you know, if you're willing to talk to me, I can drive over here and be here at moment's notice. So if indefinite lets me to come back, that would be great.
My recommendation would be just to table, and then Mr. Garrison can work with the city manager of setting up an appropriate time,
Yes.
you know, in August, September, or whenever he's had
After the
opportunity
beach.
to.
Yes, right.
If you told me it had to be that week, I have come back from the beach for meetings before.
Thank you, Melissa, I appreciate the recommendation. Okay. So this ordinance was introduced and said, thank you for your time. Does
Thank you.
anybody else wish to speak before we move forward? No? Okay, any other questions?
You just got to close the public hearing.
Okay. I hereby close the public hearing, and thank you, Terry. Okay, this ordinance was introduced, seconded, and discussed at the May 27th meeting, but the applicant has requested that we table and that we continue the conditional use permit application regarding 0 King Avenue at a later meeting. Do I have a motion?
Yep. Madam Mayor, I move that we table conditional use permit to 24-108 regarding 0 King Avenue for consideration at a later meeting.
Okay, I have that motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And we have tabled this conditional use permit. Item 11 is to receive a presentation and consider authorizing the staff to post the draft fiscal year 2024 Community Development Block Grant Annual Action Plan for a 30-day comment period. Ms. Tate.
Madam Mayor and members of City Council, as you are aware, this is a 5-year consolidated planning year for our Community Development Block Grant Entitlement Program. And then also along with that, we have to approve our annual action plan, so what we will be spending this year's entitlement funds on. So the 5-year consolidated plan will cover the period from October 1st of this year to September 30th of 2029. So it's been a little bit more of a lift in terms of every normal annual action plan because our 5 years has been completed and we're going back out to the community and getting a lot more data and input related to what are the needs over the next 5 years that we see. So we've completed stakeholder consultation, various citizen participation meetings. We've met with public agencies and nonprofit service organizations. We've had meetings kind of related to different topics. The consolidated plan will include, or does include that draft plan, an in-depth housing needs assessment, a housing market analysis. It goes into different needs related to demographics and different areas throughout the city. And then it also creates a strategic plan for local priorities. And then lastly, the annual action plan will develop or identify the proposed activities for program year 2024, which is from October 1st of this year to September 30th of 2025. So the draft plan is extremely long and goes into a lot of in-depth data and statistics and analysis, and that draft is included in your packets, and if authorized by council, will be posted for a 30-day public comment period. But I wanted to focus on the proposed priority needs. So these are kind of overarching needs that a lot of different projects could likely fall under. So the identified needs for this consolidated plan are neighborhood revitalization, affordable housing development, providing for public services, improve public facilities and infrastructure, and then administrative and planning costs to operate the program. And I will point out, and as you are aware, in last fiscal year's budget and also this upcoming fiscal year's budget, the general fund has covered the administrative or planning costs, but we want to leave that in there in case the decision is ever to change and have the administrative costs of the program go back to being within the grant. So that's why you notice that last bubble there. So just a high-level overview of Community Development Block Grant entitlement. Any activity or program that we fund with these allocation must meet one of 3 national objectives. So it must benefit low to moderate income persons, and that has to be at least 70% of the grant. Prevent or eliminate blight, and that cannot be more than 30% of the grant. And then urgent needs is when health and welfare are threatened, and you can typically think of that in times of emergency and isn't something that we have typically used in recent times. So what does it mean to be low to moderate income? These are the 2024 numbers released by HUD. So you can see those various household sizes there and the amounts. And that's the highest end, so you could certainly make less than that. So a 4-person household could definitely make less than $71,900, but they couldn't make any more than that to benefit from the program. So it's been a couple meetings now, but we came and kind of presented some general ideas that we had on what we could potentially use the funding for. So public services, we are limited to 15% of the grant amount. So for this year, we have $167,321 coming as part of the entitlement program. So a 15% cap of that is just a little over $25,000. The public services are, there are nonprofits already in the community doing different things, and so it helps. We set up a subrecipient agreement with them and work with them to disperse those funds. In the past annual action plan, we funded WARM through our public services cap, and we also funded LifeWorks and their breadbasket program and food pantry program. So we continually get interest in this public services cap amount when we go out and do our citizen participation meetings. And so this year, to keep kind of full transparency, we decided to put out an application process, and I'll go over that in a little bit more detail of what we are proposing or what staff would recommend that you fund with that 15% cap. The next program that staff is recommending is critical home repair, and that would be giving $50,000 to Renewing Homes of Greater Augusta, and I covered a little bit more about them in a previous meeting, but they do roof repairs, they do handicap accessibility, they do some plumbing, and they're really trying to make homes safe, warm, dry, so really meet those basic needs for low to moderate income individuals. So we would also set up an agreement with them. They would take applications as they already do they get funds through Stanton and run this program there, and have seen a need in Waynesboro but haven't had, the ability to fund it in the past. And this would allow them to do that specifically for Waynesboro residents. And the $50,000 came from just kind of asking them, how much do you think you could spend in this program year? And that's a number that they felt comfortable starting with. I believe they started with that amount in Stanton and have since increased a little bit. I want to say up to 80,000, but they felt like to start a little bit smaller would be good to see where they were at. So that leaves a little over $90,000 that can be programmed for different projects. So as you'll remember, there are 2 projects that have applied for low-income housing tax credits to develop apartments for low to moderate income individuals within the city. One is on Alston Court and the other is on B Street. So staff would recommend that the funding be utilized to acquire those properties, so to kind of help in that purchase cost for those projects so that they could continue moving their projects along to fund or to make sure that those projects are developed. So I'll go into a little more detail about all these in the next slides. So for the public services, we did open an application process from May 1st to May 15th. Staff received 8 separate funding requests, so 8 different organizations, and that totaled $73,630. And as you know, we only have $25,098 to utilize for public services. So staff looked at all of the different requests and what those requests were for, and then also took into account all of the public outreach, the stakeholder meetings, kind of what are the priority needs that we're starting to identify in the consolidated plan. And so staff recommends funding the requests that are directly related to housing payments, utility payments, keeping people in their homes, and sheltering. So HERO, an organization that does provide funds to help keep individuals in their home. It's kind of mirrored off SACRA in Stanton, Augusta area. They requested $5,000, and so staff recommends that we fund that $5,000. Another request that came directly related to sheltering individuals was from WARM, who we have provided funds to in the past. They requested $12,480, and to make that number that we need work, staff would recommend funding them at $10,098. And then LifeWorks also requested $12,000, and not for their breadbasket program, but specifically what they referred to as a micro grant or micro grant loan type program. And it would be doing very similar to what HERO does in terms of helping keep individuals in their home. They requested $12,000, and to make that number work, staff would recommend funding them at $10,000. One other organization that was somewhat housing related or housing related is Blue Ridge Legal Services, that helps, people going through different evictions. The reason staff did not recommend that one above the others is simply because it isn't as direct of a benefit, a direct payment, and that was how we determined that. Other requests came from Valley Program of Aging Services, from Meals on Wheels, CASA, and New Directions related to kind of violence and domestic abuse. And then RISE also submitted an application for children's education and children's programming. And then the next, this is related to the low-income housing tax credit project. So Virginia Housing has released their preliminary rankings, and you can see the ones that are highlighted in blue are recommended for funding. So 1030 Alston Court is ranked the highest and recommended for funding. And then that one that falls just outside of the blue is Rosenwald Point, and that is the project proposed at B Street. So I've spoken with them about, what they think their possibility is of being funded and whether or not allocation of these funds would somehow allow them to be funded. But because the applications are already in, that doesn't really affect them. So there's a little bit of flux with this request or with this allocation, but essentially staff would be saying with that $92,000, If both were to be funded, you could split the 92,000 between both to help for land acquisition. If only one was to be funded, likely Alston Court, the entirety of that amount could go for land acquisition for that project. So the final rankings, these are just preliminary rankings, that they'll be posted this week on June 13th, and then it won't, fully be finalized until June 26th when their board votes. But it would all be completed by the time you need to adopt this plan. I have reached out to both projects and asked for them to provide some information about how these funds could help them keep these projects moving. And have received from one and just spoke with the other one today, so can provide that to you for, a little bit more detail on how this works towards their funding mechanism. But in hearing from the Alston Court project, it really just helps keep things moving on time. It's a very complex funding mechanism where they're pulling from a lot of different grants in a lot of different areas, and that this would help move the project forward. Although after speaking with Rosenwald Point, because the applications are in, kind of promising the funds is not going to somehow bump them into a funding scenario if they are going to fall outside of a funding scenario. So I did clarify that point with them today. So the draft plans are need to be put on display for a 30-day public comment period. So staff plans to have those posted by June 17th. You would hold a public hearing on the plans on July 8th, and then council would adopt the plan on July 22nd, and we're checking to see if possibly it could be pushed as late till the first meeting in August, if possible. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Are there any questions?
It's got a couple things, Leslie. Regarding the contribution to the land acquisition, so I don't recall this being the point for Rosenwald, but I guess clarification for both. Are either or are one of the developments intending to provide 100% non-market rate housing?
Yeah, they both are 100%. I did clarify that. The Alston Court project, I believe, has more of a variation in terms of people that are 30%, 60%, 80%. So they have more of a variation than maybe Rosenwald, and I'd have to confirm that, but they both will be 100% of some reduction.
Degree.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that we wouldn't supporting something that had even 10% of
Sure.
market rate. And then the question, I had one question as you were speaking about the LifeWorks project. So did you say micro grant or micro loan?
I think it's intended to be a loan program, but I'd have to look and clarify. I see it more to be similar exactly to what Hero is doing, so I guess it would be just a grant
More
then.
of a grant,
Yes.
yeah, because that's one of my
Sure,
reservations.
yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, that's my understanding, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Leslie. Okay, is there a motion authorizing staff to post the draft fiscal year 2024 Community Development Block Grant?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. And that motion passes 5-0. Item 12 is communication, correspondence, and calendar. Mr. Ham.
I don't have anything this evening, ma'am.
Okay. Then we'll move on to item 13, which is citizen comment period. Do we have anyone signed up?
Yes, ma'am. I have one individual, Donna Yobbs.
Hi. I just want to make a comment about CUPs. And it'd be wonderful if the council could help direct staff that when you do a CUP, that you request a community benefit in exchange for streamlining and getting people moving forward with a lot of these conditional use permits. That that benefit can be as simple as, funding affordable housing. It could be towards parks and recs. It can be towards public art. The main thing is to let people know when they come to Waynesboro, they need to contribute to the community if they're asking for something beyond what it's currently zoned. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that's it. Okay. So item 14 is a closed meeting as authorized by Section 2.2-3711. Is there a motion?
Madam Mayor, I move to recess into a closed meeting in order to consult with city attorney regarding specific legal matters relating to Smith zoning and contractual matters requiring the provision of legal advice and discuss public contract involving the expenditure of public funds, including discussion of the terms or scope of such contract, where discussions in an open session would adversely affect the city's bargaining position or negotiating strategy as authorized by sections 2.2-3711A, 8, and 29 of the Virginia Code.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second?
Okay, is there any discussion? This requires a roll call vote. Ms. Porter? Aye.
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 Okay.
Thank you, Melissa. She brought me one. She's not paying attention. I said, thank you for this, but she brought me one.
Oh.
Okay, is there a motion to return to open meeting and to certify the closed meeting?
Let's see, we're back after Rick. All right, Madam Mayor, I move to adopt the following resolution. Whereas the City Council of Waynesboro has convened in a closed meeting on this date pursuant to the affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. And whereas Section 2.2-3712 of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this City Council that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with the Virginia law. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council of Waynesboro hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, one, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in an enclosed meeting to which of this certification resolution applies, and two, only such business matters were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the City Council of Waynesboro.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you, Mr. Short. Any discussion? Okay, this requires a roll call vote.
Mayor Williams?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wood?
Aye.
Mr. Allen? Mr. Short?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye.
Okay, we're back in session. That brings us to Mr. Allen's item number 15. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'd like to make a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. I knew you would. Do we have a second?
Second?
Thank you, Mr. Short. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.